Good morning, or good evening, Game Crazy. Thank you so much for coming in. It looks like enough time should have passed for everyone to come in, at least for a bit. How does everything sound today? I moved some things around in my setup, so hopefully this will be a little bit easier for everyone to not only hear me, but also for me to be able to read comfortably for y'all. The volume is good? That's good. Alright. Well, here we are, once again, reading some stories for everyone. My thing's being a little weird. Okay, that should be good. I keep talking about how cursed my setup is. Maybe one day I'll actually take a picture of it to horrify y'all. But for some housekeeping before we begin reading, once again, this is our Mythic Mondays, where I start reading to y'all some myths and legends from Irish folklore. And tomorrow, for Toothy Tuesdays, I'll be playing a horror game for y'all. And I will be continuing, and may or may not be finishing Absolov. Couldn't be anywhere near as bad as my original setup. Maybe, maybe not. It's just simple, yet at the same time very cluttered. But I do the best with what I can. So, and just as a reminder, on All Hallows Eve, or Halloween, or Samhain, however you wish to call it, I shall be debuting as my live 2D model. What I'll probably do might be a little bit similar to what I did for my birthday stream, where I'll go over my lore once again to the people who may or may not already know about it. I'll answer questions and comments if anyone has any. I may or may not read a little bit of stories. I might have some slides or something like that prepared to kind of go over everything as I debut. I will link to y'all information to my Patreon that I'll be making. For anyone who wishes to support me in any ways outside of Twitch or YouTube, any of those. And I will potentially be continuing to play my favorite game series, Dragon Age. These are all just rough ideas, which may or may not happen. Oh, and I'll also probably have a movie night on Halloween as well after the stream. And I think watching some of the classic monster movies might be fun. You know, just getting cozy and watching like the old black and white Dracula and things like that might be fun. But that is for then. But for now, I shall continue reading to y'all Irish myths and legends. I shall see if I can make it to that or not. It will certainly depend on the time and how my plans intersect with it. So, what most likely will happen is that it will be at 5 p.m. That seems to be a decent time frame for me, at least in my time zone and it linking up with others. But for now, I shall continue my book reading. I was a little bit worried as to whether or not I would have the energy to read to y'all today, as I had a monthly meeting earlier this morning, but thankfully things ended up nicely. But without much further ado, I shall read to y'all The Legend of Knockgrafton, a T. Crofton Croker legend, or story, or interpretation. They never quite specify just who the names are in relation to the stories underneath the titles. Oh, I almost forgot. So for those of you who may or may not know, I have actually just recently published my first book. You can get it through Amazon. You can get it Kindle. You can get it paperback. And you can get it hardback. I have personally made all versions of that cover. So if you wish to find that, I shall... let me see if I can link that information to y'all after the stream. But for now, let's focus on this one. There was once a poor man who lived in the fertile glen of Aherlow, at the foot of the gloomy Galtee Mountains, and he had a great hump on his back. He looked just as if his body had been rolled up and placed upon his shoulders, and his head was pressed down with the weight so much that his chin, when he was sitting, used to rest upon his knees for support. The country people were rather shy when meeting him in any lonesome place, for though, poor creature, he was as harmless and as inoffensive as a newborn infant, yet his deformity was so great that he scarcely appeared to be a human creature, and some ill-minded persons had set strange stories about him afloat. He was said to have a great knowledge of herbs and charms, but certain it was that he had a mighty skillful hand in plaiting straws and brushes into hats and baskets, which was the way he made his livelihood. Lustmore, for that was the nickname upon him by reason of his always wearing a sprig of a fairy cap, or Lustmore, known as the foxglove to the common folk, and his little straw hat, would ever get a higher penny for his plaited work than anyone else, and perhaps that was the reason why some, out of envy, had circulated the strange stories about him. Be that it as it may, it happened that he was returning one evening from the pretty town of Care towards Copper, and as little Lustmore walked very slowly on account of the great hump upon his back, it was quite dark when he came to the old moat of Knockgrafton, which stood to the right-hand side of his road. tired and weary he was, and he now lays comfortable in his own mind at thinking how much further he had to travel, and that he should be walking all the night. So he sat down under the moat to rest himself, and began looking mournfully upon the moon, which, rising in clouded majesty at length, apparent queen, unveiled her peerless light, and o'er the dark her silver mantle threw. Presently there rose a wild strain of unearthly melody on the ear of little Lustmore. He listened, and he thought that he had never heard such ravishing music before. It was like the sound of many voices, each mingling and bleeding with the other so strangely that they seemed to be one, though all singing different strains. And the words of the song were this: Da luan da mort, da luan da mort, da luan da mort. When there would be a moment's pause, and then the round of melody went on again. Lustmore listened attentively, scarcely drawing his breath, lest he might loose the slightest noise. He now plainly perceived that the singing was within the moat, and though at first it had charmed him so much, he began to get tired of hearing the same round sung over and over, so often without any change. So, availing himself of the pause when Da luan da mort had been sung 3 times, he took up the tune and raised it with the words Augusta Darin, and then went on singing with the voices of the moat, Da luan da mort, finishing the melody when the pause came again with Augusta Dardine. The fairies within Knockgrafton, for the song was a fairy melody, when they heard this addition to the tune, were so much delighted that, with instant resolve, it was determined to bring the mortal among them, whose musical skill so far exceeded theirs. And little Lustmore was conveyed into their company with the eddying speed of a whirlwind. Glorious to behold was the sight that burst upon him as he came down through the moat, twirling round and round with the lightness of a straw, to the sweetest music that kept time to his motion. The greatest honor was then paid him, for he was put above all the musicians, and he had servants tending upon him, and everything to his heart's content, and a hearty welcome to all, and, in short, he was made as much as if he had been the first man in all the land. Presently Lustmore saw a great consultation going forward among the fairies, and, notwithstanding civility, he felt very much frightened, until one stepped out from the rest and came up to him and said, Lust more, doubt not nor deplore, for the hump which you bore on your back is no more. Look down on the floor and view it, Lustmore. When these words were said, poor little Lustmore felt himself so light and so happy that he thought he could have bounded at one jump over the moon, like the cow in the history of the cat and the fiddle, and he saw, with inexpressible pleasure, his hump tumble down upon the ground from his shoulders. He then tried to lift up his head, and he did so with becoming caution, fearing that he might knock it against the ceiling of the grand hall. Where he was, he looked round and round again with the greatest wonder and delight upon everything, which appeared more and more beautiful, and overpowered at becoming such a resplendent scene. His head grew dizzy, and his eyesight became dim. At last he fell into a sound sleep, and when he awoke, he found that it was broad daylight, the sun shining brightly, and the birds singing sweetly, and that he was lying just about a foot of the moat from Knockgrafton, with the cows and the sheep grazing peacefully round about him. The first thing Lusmore did, after saying his prayers, was to put his hand behind to feel for his hump. But no sign of one was there on his back, and he looked at himself with great pride, for he had now become a well-shaped, dapper little fellow, and more than that, found himself in a full suit of new clothes, which he concluded the fairies had made for him. Towards Kappa he went, stepping out as lightly and springing up at every step as if he had been all his life a dancing master. Not a creature who met Lustmore knew him without his hump, and he had a great work to persuade everyone that he was the same man. In truth, he was not, so far as outward appearances went. Of course, it was not long before the story of Lustmore's hump got about, and a great wonder was made of it. Through the country, for miles round, it was the talk of everyone, high and low. One morning, when Lustmore was sitting contented enough at his cabin door, and up came an old woman to him, and asked him if he could direct her to Kappa. I need to give you no directions, my good woman, said Lustmore, for this is Kappa, and whom may you want here? I have come, said the woman, out of DC's country, in the country of Waterford, looking after one Lustmore who, I have heard tell, had his hump taken off by the fairies, for there is a son of a gossip of mine who has got a hump on him that will be his death, and maybe, if he could use the same charm as Lustmore, the hump may be taken off him. And now I have told you my reason for coming so far. 'Tis to find out about this charm, if I can. Lustmore, who was ever a good-natured little fellow, told the woman all the particulars, how he had raised the tune for the fairies at Knockgrafton, how his hump had been removed from his shoulders, and how he had got a new suit of clothes in the bargain. The woman thanked him very much, and then went away quite happy and easy in her own mind. When she came back to her gossip's house in the country of Waterford, she told her everything that Lusmore had said, and they put the little humpbacked man, who was a peevish and cunning creature, from his birth, upon a car, and took him all the way across the country. It was a long journey, but they did not care for that. So the hump was taken off from him, and they brought him just at nightfall, and left him under the old moat of Knockgrafton. Jack Madden, for that was the humped man's name, had not been sitting there long when he heard the tune going on within the moat, much sweeter than before, for the fairies were singing it the way Lusmore had settled the music for them, and the song was going on. Du land du mot, du land mot, Augusta Doreen, without ever stopping. Jack Madden, who was in a great hurry to get quit of his hump, never thought of waiting until the fairies had done, or watching for a fit of opportunity to raise the tune higher again than Lusmore had. So, having heard them sing it over 7 times without stopping, out he bawls, never minding the time, nor the humor of the tune, or how he could bring his words in properly. Augusta Dardine Augusta Hina, thinking that if one day was good, 2 were better, and that if Lusmore had 1 new suit of clothes given to him, he should have 2. No sooner had the words passed his lips than he was taken up and whisked into the moat with prodigious force, and the fairies came crowding round him with great anger, screeching and screaming and roaring out, "Who spoiled our tune? Who spoiled our tune?" And one stepped up above him, all the rest, and said, Jack Madden, your words came so bad in the tune we felt glad in, this castle you're had in. May your life, that your life we may sadden. There's 2 humps for Jack Madden. And 20 of the strongest fairies brought Lustmore's hump and put it down upon poor Jack's back, over his own, where it became fixed as firmly as if it was nailed on with 12 penny nails, by the best carpenter that had ever drove one. Out of their castle then they kicked them, and in the morning, when Jack Madden's mother and her gossip came to look after their little man, they found him half dead, lying at the foot of the moat, with the other hump on his back. Well, to be sure, how they did look at each other, but they were afraid to say anything, lest a hump might be put upon their own shoulders. Home they brought the unlucky Jack Madden with them, as downcast in their hearts and their looks as ever two gossips were. And what through the weight of his other hump and the long journey, he died soon after, leaving, they say, his heavy curse to anyone who would go to listen fairy tunes again. So, if you were here last week, you would recognize this story, for it is similar to the one we read last time. The thematic and base story elements were all the same, but there were details that were changed and different. And this is not unusual for many different stories. You will find stories in many different provinces or counties next to one another, similar but different and changed. It's always interesting to see how things are altered depending on where the story is told. Hydration break? Even within the spans of a few different close countries, you will find myths and legends that are similar yet altered from one another. Take, for example, something like the Kelpie. This creature has themes related to other creatures, like the Nixie. I'm probably going to say this incorrectly, but the Fogmosserin? Something akin to that. The Neck or Noken. All of these creatures have similar traits and descriptions, but they also have varying details about them too. So, such little things I find truly interesting to look into and research on. Now, the next story is called A Donegal Fairy, attributed to Letitia McClintock. McClintock. There we go. Now, this seems to be another story heavily written in accent, so I shall try my best. I may or may not slip into the accent that it puts forth, if not to make the act of reading it a little bit easier. 'Cause sometimes there are even misspellings within the book that are there purposefully to push forward the accent. Ah, I see, even just quickly. Instead of creatures, there's crathers. Crathers? So, I shall try my best. It's a bad thing to displeasure the gentry, sure enough. They can be unfriendly if they're angered, and they can be the very best o' best of good neighbors if they're treated kindly. My mother's sister was her alone in the house one day with a big pot of water boiling on the fire. And any old the wee folk fell down the chimney and slipped with his leg in the hot water. He let a terrible squeal out of him, and in a minute the house was full of wee creatures, pulling him out of the pot and carrying him across the floor. "Did she scald you?" my aunt heard him say. "Nay, nay, it was mysel scalded my Ansel," quoth the wee fellow. A weel," says they. "If it was your Ansel scalded yourself, we'll say nothing, but if she had scalded you, we'd had make her pay." I swear I wasn't trying to put forth that accent. It's just the way that it was spelt and written. It kind of naturally came, I suppose. This next story is called Lanty McCluskey's Fairy Boon, attributed to William Carleton. Seems we have a few shorter stories. Lanty McCluskey had married a wife, and, of course, it was necessary to have a house in which to keep her. Now, Lanty had taken a bit of a farm, about 6 acres, but as there was no house on it, he resolved to build one, and that it might be comfortable as possible, he selected for the site of it on one of those beautiful green circles that are supposed to be the playground of the fairies. Lanty was warned against this, but he was a headstrong man and not given to fear. He said he would not change such a pleasant situation for his house to oblige all the fairies in Europe. He accordingly proceeded with the building, which he finished off very neatly. And, as it was usual on these occasions to give one's neighbors and friend a housewarming, so, in compliance with this good and pleasant old custom, Lanty, having brought home the wife in the course of a day, got a fiddler and a lot of whiskey, and gave those who had come to see him a dance in the evening. This was all very well, and the fun and hilarity were proceeding briskly, when a noise was heard after the night had set in. "Hello, Darla. Thank you for coming in." "I'm not trying to hide from you. It's just the unfortunate nature of my kind to be a bit unseen at times." When the noise was heard after night had set in, like a crushing and straining of ribs and rafters, on the top of the house, the folks assembled all listening, and without doubt there was nothing heard but crushing and heaving and pushing and groaning and panting, as if 1,000 little men were engaged in pulling down the roof. "Come," said a voice, which spoke in the tone of a command. "Work hard. You know we must have Lanty's house down before midnight." This was an unwelcome piece of intelligence to Lanty, who, finding that his enemies were such as he could not cope with, walked out and addressed them as fellows. Gentlemen, I humbly ask your pardon for building on any place belonging to you, but if you'll have the civilitude to let me alone this night, I'll begin to pull down and remove the house tomorrow eve morning. This was followed by a noise like the clapping of 1,000 tiny little hands, and a shout of "Bravo, Lanty!" filled halfway between the two white thorns above the boreen. And after another hearty little shout of exultation, there was a brisk rushing noise, and they were heard no more. The story, however, does not end here, for Lanty, when digging the foundation of his new house, found the full of a cam, or a metal vessel of gold, so that in leaving to the fairies their playground, he became a richer man than he otherwise would have been, had he never come in contact with them at all. So just as I was mentioning before about how the story that we had read at the beginning was similar to the one of last time, this one also holds thematic elements similar to one of the stories read before. However, this one has what some might call a more positive ending, for the main character upon this story learned from his mistake and was willing to work with the people whom he had upset. The one before did not and suffered. And so, it goes to show that a little bit of decency can go quite a long way with people. The next story is called Fairies or No Fairies by T. Crofton Croker. John Mulligan was as fine an old fellow as ever threw a Carlo spur into the sides of a horse. He was, besides, as jolly a boon companion over a jug of punch as you would meet from Carnsner Point to Bloody Farland. And a good horse he used to ride, and a stiffer jug of punch than his was not in 19 barons. Maybe he stuck more to it than he ought to have done, but that is nothing whatever to the story I am going to tell. Jean believed devoutly in fairies, and an angry man was he if you doubted them. He had more fairy stories than would make, if properly printed in a rivulet of print running down the meadow of margin, 2 thick quartos for Mr. John Murray, of Albemarle Street, all of which he used to tell on all occasions that he could find listeners. Many believe his stories, many more did not believe them, but nobody, in process of time, used to contradict the old gentleman, for it was a pity to vex him. But he had a couple of young neighbors who were just come down from their first vacation in Trinity College to spend the summer months with an uncle of theirs, Mr. Whaley, an old Cromwellian who lived, this is a long name, forgive me, who lived at Allybug Millionahon. and they were too full of logic to let the old man have his own way undisputed. Hello, it's Real Deep. Thank you so much for coming in. Every story he told they laughed at, as such that it was impossible, that it was merely old woman's gabble and other such things. When he would insist that all of his stories were derived from the most credible sources, nay, that some of them had been told to him by his own grandmother, a very respectable old lady, but slightly affected in her facilities, as things that came under her own knowledge. They cut the matter short by declaring that she was in her dotage, and at the best of times had a strong propensity to pulling a long bow. But, they say, Jack Mulligan, did you ever see a fairy yourself? Never, was the reply. Well then, they answered, until you do, do not be bothering us with any more tales of my grandmother. Jack was particularly nettled at this, and took up the cudgels for his grandmother, but the youngsters were too sharp for him, and finally he got into a passion, as people generally do who have the worst of an argument. This evening it was at their uncle's, an old crony of his, with whom he had quite dined. He had taken a large portion of his usual beverage, and was quite riotous. He at last got up in a passion, ordered his horse, and, in spite of his host's entreaties, galloped off, although he had intended to have slept there, declaring that he would not have anything more to do with the pair of jackanapes puppies, who, because they had learned how to read good-for-nothing books and camp writing, and were taught by the parcel of wiggy, red-snouted, parading prigs, not, added he, however, that I say man may not be a good man and have a red nose. They imagined they knew more than a man who had held his buckle and tongue together facing the wind of the world for 5 dozen years. He rode off in a fret, and galloped as hard as his horse Shamby would power away over the limestone. Darn it, hiccuped he. Lord pardon me for swearing. He did actually curse, but I do not curse, so I always am put as close as possible. The brats had me in one thing. I never did see a fairy, and I would give up 5 as good acres as ever grew apple potatoes to get a glimpse of one, and by the powers, what is that? He looked and saw a gallant spectacle. His road lay by a noble dimsny, gracefully sprinkled with trees, not thickly planted as in a dark forest, but disposed, now in clumps of 5 or 6, now standing singly, towering over the plain of verdure around them, as a beautiful promontory arising out of the sea. He had come right opposite of the glory of the wood. It was an oak, which, in the oldest title deeds of the county, and they were at least 500 years old, was called the Old Oak of Ballinhasig. Age had hollowed its center, but its messy boughs still waved with their dark, serrated foliage. The moon was shining on its bright. If I were a poet like Mr. Wordsworth, I should tell you how the beautiful light was broken into 1,000 different fragments, and how it filled the entire tree with a glorious flood, bathing every particular leaf and showing forth every particular bough. But as I am not a poet, I shall go on with my story. By this light Jack saw a brilliant company of lovely little forms dancing under the oak with an unsteady and rolling motion. Their company was large. Some spread out far beyond the farthest boundary of the shadow of the oak's branches. Some were seen glancing through the flashes of light shining through its leaves. Some were barely visible, nestling under the trunk. Some, no doubt, were entirely concealed from his eyes. Never did man see anything more beautiful. They were not 3 inches in height, but they were white as driven snow, and beyond number numberless. Jack threw his bridle over the horse's neck and drew up to the low wall which bounded the dim sea, and leaning over it, surveyed with infinite delight their diversified gambols. By looking long at them, he soon saw objects which had not struck him at first. In particular, that in the middle was a chief of superior stature, round whom the ground appeared to move, round whom the group appeared to move. He gazed so long that he was quite overcome with joy, and could not help but shouting out, "Bravo, little fellows," said he, "well kicked and strong." But the instant he uttered the words, the night was darkened, and the fairies vanished with the speed of lightning. "I wish," said Jack, "I had held my tongue, but no matter now. I shall just turn bridle round and go back to Ballybegmoonenhallown Castle, and beat the young Master Whately's, fine reasoners they think themselves, out of the field clean." No sooner said than done, and Jack was back again as if upon the wings of the wind. He rapped fiercely at the door and called aloud for the 2 collegians. "Hello," said he, "young flatcaps. Come down now if you dare. Come down if you dare, and I shall give you ocular demonstration of the truth of what I was saying." Old Whately put his head out the window and said, "Jack Mulligan, what brings you back so soon?" "The fairies!" shouted Jack. "The fairies!" "I'm afraid," muttered the Lord of Ballybegmoonenhallown, "the last glass you took was a little too watered, but no matter. Come in and cool yourself over a tumbler of punch." He came in and sat down at a table. In great spirits he told his story, how he had seen thousands and tens of thousands of fairies dancing about the old oak of Ballinhassig. He described their beautiful dresses of shining silver, their flat crowned hats, glittering in the moonbeams, and the princely stature and demeanor of the central figure. He added that he heard them singing and playing the most enchanting music, but this was merely imagination. The young men laughed, but Jack held his ground. "Suppose," said one of the lads, "we join company with you on the road, and ride down along to the place where you saw that fine company of fairies." "Done," cried Jack, "but I will not promise that you will find them there, for I saw them scuttling up in the sky like a flight of bees, and heard their wings whizzing through the air." This, you know, was a bounce, for Jack had heard no such thing. Off rode the three, and came to the dempsey of old oak wood. They arrived at the wall flanking the field, where stood the great oak, and the moon, by this time having again emerged from the clouds, shone bright as when Jack had passed. "Look there," he cried exultingly, for the same spectacle again caught his eyes, and he pointed it to his horsewhip. "Look and deny if you can." "Why," said one of the lads, pausing, "true it is that we do see a company of white creatures, but were they fairies 10 times over, I shall go among them." And he dismounted to climb over the wall. "Ah, Tom, Tom," cried Jack, "stop, man, stop. What are you doing? The fairies, the good people I mean, hate to be meddled with. You will be pinched or blinded, or your horse will cast its shoe, or, look, a wilful man will have his way. Oh, oh, he is almost at the oak. God help him, for he is past the help of man." By this time, Tom was under the tree and burst out laughing. "Jack," said he, "keep your prayers to yourself. Your fairies are not bad at all. I believe they will make tolerably be good catsup." "Catsup," said Jack, who, when he found that the 2 lads, for the second had followed his brother, were both laughing in the middle of the fairies, had dismounted and advanced slowly. "What do you mean by catsup?" "Nothing," replied Tom, "but that they are mushrooms, as indeed they were, and your Oberon is merely this overgrown puffball." Poor Mulligan gave a long whistle of amazement, staggered back to his horse without saying a word, and rode home in a hard gallop, never looking behind him. Many a long day was it before he ventured to face the laughters at Ballybenmullinghone, and to the day of his death the people of the parish, from 5 parishes around, called him nothing but Mushroom Jack, such being their pronunciation of mushroom. I should be sorry if all my fairy tales ended with so little dignity, but these are actors, as I foretold you. We're all spirits, and are melted into air, into thin air. So, I think I should read for y'all one or two more stories. This next one seems to be a poem or song. It's called The Spell Struck by T.W. Rolliston. Don't know if we've had that name pop up before. She walks as she were moving, some mystic dance to tread, so falls her gliding footstep, so leans her listening head. For once the fairy harping, she danced upon the hill, and through her brain and bosom the music pulses still. Her eyes were bright and tearless, but wide in yearning pain. She longs for nothing earthly, but oh, to hear again the sound that held her listening upon her moonlit path, the rippling fairy music that filled the lonely wrath. Her lips that once tasted the fairy banquet's bliss shall glad no mortal lover with maiden smile or kiss. She's dead to all things living since that November eve, and when she dies in autumn, no living thing will grieve. Is this a new segment I am coming across? Alright, so it seems that from here on out we're going into a different classification of the fairy folk. In particular, this seems to be over the cave fairies, whereas the ones before did not have their own little segment, but this is still within the troping fairies chapter. Now that I look, it appears that the troping fairies have a few different subclassifications within it. So these all that I have read are the general ones. It seems up next we have the cave fairies, which I think I shall save for later. The next notable segment is called The Popular Notions Considering the City Race. Next, we seem to have something about the changelings. And the final one of the troping fairies is in reference to the marrow. And after that, we will leave the troping fairies segment and go into the solitary fairies. So, since this is going into a new subclassification, I think I shall save this for next time so that it is a little bit more easily put into. Or, actually, now that I look at it, the cave fairy segment only seems to be a few pages long, actually. Alright, so I think I shall actually continue with reading the Cave Fairy segment, as it only seems to be within a few pages long. But I'm first going to grab something to drink, as I've run out of my water, and use the restroom real quick. So I suppose this will be a quick intermission, and then we shall continue on. Alright, welcome back everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. So, as I said before our break, the little story that we're coming up to only seems to be within, or be a few pages long. So, I'll go ahead and read all of them for y'all today. And we will continue on with the rest of the stories later. Oh, and I see here that Eriqua Galindo had followed me. Thank you so much for the follow, my dear. And I'm sorry I didn't catch that in the beginning. Now, let us continue with our story. So, about the Cave Fairies by Lady Wilde. It is believed by many people that the Cave Fairies are the remnants of the ancient Tuatha I probably pronounced that all terribly. I'm terribly sorry. Tuatha de Dananns, who once ruled Ireland, but were conquered by the Malstinians. Malsanians. These Tautha were great necromancers, skilled in all magic, and excellent in all the arts, as builders, poets, and musicians. At first, the Malsaians were going to destroy them utterly, but gradually were so fascinated and captivated by the gifts and power of the Tutha, they allowed them to remain and to build forts, where they held high festival with music and singing and the chants of the bards. And the breed of horses they reared could not be surpassed in the world, fleet as the wind, with an arched neck and a broad chest and the quivering nostril, and the large eyes that showed they were made of fire and flame, and not of dull, heavy earth. And the Tautha made stables for them in the great caves of the hills, and they were shod with silver and golden bridles, and never a slave was allowed to ride them. A splendid sight was the cavalcade of the Tautha de Danann knights. I've probably pronounced that differently every single time. I'm so sorry. 70 steeds, each with a jewel on his forehead like a star, and 70 horsemen, all the sons of kings, in their green mantles fringed with gold, and golden helmets on their head, and golden greaves on their limbs, and each knight having in his hand a golden spear. And so they lived for 100 years and more. For their enchantments, they could resist the power of death. So this first story seems to be the longest one within this collection. It is called Edain the Queen. Now, interestingly enough, there is not a name underneath of which this could be attributed to, such as before in the general troping fairies stories. There was always a name under the title, either someone who had collected the story or recounted it, I'm not sure. But there's nothing to be seen here. Now, it happened that the king of Munster one day saw a beautiful girl bathing, and he loved her and made her his queen. And in all the land was no woman so lovely to look upon as the fair Edain. And the fame of her beauty came to the ears of the great and powerful chief and kings of the Tautha de Danann, Mider by name, Midair by name. So he disguised himself and went to the court of the king of Munster as a wandering bard, that he might look on the beauty of Edain, and he challenged the king to a game of chess. "Who is this man that I should play chess with him?" said the king. "Try me," said the stranger. "You will find me a worthy foe." Then the king said, "But the chessboard is in the queen's apartment, and I cannot disturb her." However, when the queen heard that a stranger had challenged the king to chess, she sent her page in with the chessboard, and then came herself to greet the stranger. And Mider was so dazzled with her beauty that he could not speak. He could only gaze on her. The queen also seemed troubled, and after a time she left them alone. "Now, what shall we play for?" asked the king. "Let the conqueror name the reward," answered the stranger, "and whatever he desires, let it be granted to him." "What a foolish thing to agree to, king." "Agreed," replied the monarch. And they played the game, and the stranger won. "What is your demand now?" cried the king. "I have given my word that whatever you name shall be yours." "I demand the Lady Adaine, the queen, as my reward," replied the stranger. "But I shall not ask you to give her up to me till this day year." And the stranger departed. Now the king was utterly perplexed and confounded, but he took good note of the time, and on that night, just a 12-month after, he made a great feast at Tara for all the princes, and he placed 3 lines of his Trojan warriors all round the palace, and forbade any stranger to enter on pain of death. So, all being secure, as he thought, he took his place at the feast with the beautiful Adaine beside him, all glittering with jewels and a golden crown on her head, and the revelry went on till midnight. Just then, to his horror, the king looked up, and there stood the stranger in the middle of the hall. But no one seemed to perceive him, save only the king. He fixed his eyes on the queen, and coming toward her, he struck a golden harp he had in his hand, and sang in a low, sweet voice, "O Adaine, wilt thou come with me to a wonderful place that is mine? White are the teeth there, and black are the brows, and crimson as mead are the lips of the lovers. O woman, if thou comest to my proud people, 'tis a golden crown shall circle thy head. Thou shalt dwell by the sweet streams of my land, and drink of the mead and wine in the arms of thy lover." Well, he gives quite a good nothing like a bard. Then he gently put his arm round the queen's waist, and drew her up from her royal throne, and went forth with her through the midst of all the guests, none hindering, and the king himself was like one in a dream, and could neither speak nor move. But when he recovered himself, then he knew that the stranger was one of the fairy chiefs of the Tuatha De Danann, who had carried off the beautiful Adaine to his fairy mansion. So he sent round messengers to all the kings of Erin, that they should destroy all the forts of the hated Tuatha race, and slay and kill, and let none live till the queen, his young bride, be brought back to him. Still she came not. Then the king, out of revenge, ordered his men to block up all the stables where the royal horses of the Danans were kept, so that they might die of hunger. But the horses were of noble blood, and no bars or bolts could hold them, and they broke through the bars and rushed out like a whirlwind, and spread all over the country. And the kings, when they saw the beauty of the horses, forgot all about the search for Queen Edane, and only strove how they could seize and hold as their own some of the fiery steeds with the silver hoofs and golden bridles. Then the king raged in his wrath, and sent for the chief of the Druids, and he told him he shall be put to death unless he discovered the place where the queen lay hid. So the Druid went all over Ireland and searched and made spells with oghams, and at last, having carved 4 oghams on 4 wands of a hazel tree, it was revealed to him that deep down in the hill at the very centre of Ireland, Queen Edane was hidden away in the enchanted palace of Midar the fairy chief. Then the king gathered a great army, and they circled the hill and dug down and down till they came to the very centre. And just as they reached the gate of the fairy palace, Midar, by his enchantments, sent forth 50 beautiful women from the hillside to distract the attention of the warriors, all so like the queen in form and feature and dress that the king himself could not make out truly if his own wife were amongst them or not. But Edane, when she saw her husband so near her, was touched by love of him in her heart, and the power of the enchantment fell from her soul, and she came to him, and he lifted her up his royal horse, and kissed her tenderly, and brought her back safely to his royal palace of Tartha, where they lived happily ever after. But soon after the power of the Tuatha De Danann was broken for ever, and the remnants that was left took refuge in the caves, where they exist to this day and practice their magic and work spells, and are safe from death until the judgment day. Well, once again, a similar story with different elements. Nothing quite like the enrapturing music of a bard, though. Up next, we have a little segment on the Black Steed. Of the great breed of splendid horses, some remained for several centuries, and were at once known by their noble shape and qualities. The last of them belonged to a great lord in Connaught, and when he died, all his effects were sold by auction. The royal steed came to the hammer, and was bought up by an emissary of the English government, who wanted to get possession of the specimen of the magnificent Irish breed in order to have it transported to England. But when the groom attempted to mount the high-spirited animal, it reared and threw the base-born Curl violently to the ground, killing him on the spot. Then, fleet as the wind, the horse galloped away, and finally plunged into the lake and was seen no more. So ended the great race of the mighty Tuatha De Danann horses in Ireland, the like of which had never been seen since in all the world for majesty and beauty. Oh, thank you, Skynex21, for the follow. That's so very kind of you, my dear. This next segment is called The Black Dog. Sometimes the cave fairies made a straight path in the sea from one island to another, all paved with coral under the water, but no one can tread it except the fairy race. Fishermen coming home late at night, on looking down, frequently seen them passing and repassing. A black band of little men with black dogs, who are very fierce if anyone tries to touch them. There was an old man named Khan, who lived on an island all alone, except for a black dog who kept him company. Now all the people knew right well that he was a fairy king, and could walk the water at night like the other fairies, so they feared him greatly, and brought him presents of cake and fowls, for they were afraid of him and his evil demon, the dog. For often men coming home late have heard the steps of this dog, and his breathing quite close to them, though they could not see him, and one man nearly died of fright, and was only saved by the priests who came and prayed over him. So I am known to stories of the black dog, and it is said that people who hear the footsteps may die. So this is a story known to me, though this is the first that I've heard of a true story, and not just a little figment of information. Fragment of information, pardon me. The next and last story of the cave fairies is called The Three Ladies in White. One summer's evening, a young girl, the daughter of a man who owned a farm, was milking the cows in the yard when three beautiful ladies, all in white, suddenly appeared and asked her for a drink of milk. Now the girl knew well that milk should not be given away without using some precaution against fairy wiles, so she hesitated, fearing to bring ill luck to the cows. "Is that the way you treat us?" said one of the ladies, and she slapped the girl on the face. "But you'll remember us," said the second lady, and she took the hold of the girl's thumb and twisted it out of the joint. "And your lover will be false to you," said the third, and with that she turned the girl's mantle crooked and back to the front. Then the first lady took a vessel and milked the cow, and they all drank of the milk as much as they wanted. After which they turned to the girl and bade her beware of again offending the spirits of the cave, for they were very powerful and would not let her off so easily next time. The poor girl fainted from fright, and was found quite senseless when they came to look for her, but the white ladies had disappeared. Though the story must have been true, just as she told it when she came to her senses, for not a drop of milk was left in the pail, nor could a drop more be got from the cows all that evening. All right, my lovely dears. Well, that was the final bit of the Cave Fairies segment of the Troping Fairies General Collection. Now, thank you all so much for joining me today. And just as a reminder, tomorrow I shall be playing through the horror game Absulov as a part 2 at 5 p.m. CST for our 2B Tuesday segment. I am also debuting as a live 2D VTuber on Halloween, also 5 p.m. CST, where I will be going over lore, questions, I may or may not do a little bit of reading, and playing my favorite game, Dragon Age. I shall also let you know that I am an author of a book that has just recently been published, and I shall see if I can connect that to in the chat. As you can probably hear, my cat's timer is clinking up, so I don't believe he will tolerate me not giving him attention much longer. Here we go. So my book is available in multiple formats. It is digital, paperback, and hardback available. I also have an Etsy and other things available for y'all. But here should be a link to my book. Now let me see if I have any friends that are still streaming right now. Oh, I see that my friend Shrew is playing some old school RuneScape. So I think it would be quite fun to go and give her a little hello. Oh, Jax, get down, baby boy. Down you go. So everyone, please do be very kind to Lay as we send her a little hello. Let me see if I can do this properly. Alright, so everyone, with our glimmer, let us beguile and enchant Shrew. Let's give the little witch something to get excited about. Thank you all so much for joining me today. It truly means the world to me that you are here with me. So, once again, thank you so much, and ta-ta!